Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Voice of Supply Chain, brought to you by ISM New Jersey. I am your host, Katherine McCleery, and as every episode before, we are telling the personal stories of people in procurement and supply chain doing extraordinary things. And today is a very special episode. This is my last episode, and I'm closing out this show the way that I only dreamed I could. And it's with someone who's been in my, career and in my personal corner in procurement tech since the beginning of joining this industry. Today we have Phil Ideson from Art of Procurement coming on the show. And he spent decades working in procurement before most people even knew what that was. He started in automotive, he went to pharma, he's lived in Europe and worked in Asia. He's had so many different kinds of procurement leadership roles. And over that career, he has built up such an incredible knowledge for procurement and supply chain and decided to create his own podcast, Art of Procurement. So fast forward to now, it's now the number one procurement podcast in the world. And we get to have him on the show today to help me close this series out. And I am so excited to bring him on. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro. And, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to chat. I know that we could probably chat for days. So I'm just really interested to see kind of where we take the conversation, but really happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. And yeah, maybe the audience doesn't know this. Phil and I have been working together in several different ways since 2019, I believe, is when we first spoke. And he's really helped shepherd me into this industry and understand the people, how everything works. And we've had so many conversations just like this one. And so I want to treat this today just like letting you guys in on one of our typical conversations. And sometimes we're snarky. Sometimes there's a little bit of British humor baked in. And most of the time,
I'm the only one that finds it funny, by the way.
Most of the time, it's Phil shedding some light on something that I never thought of. And then, it's kind of the inside track on procurement that I've always gotten from Phil. So I'm glad to let everybody in on this kind of fun dynamic that we have. And if you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat. This is your chance to ask Phil anything you want to. And as a quick reminder, if you miss any of this, it's going to be recorded. You'll be able to watch it later on YouTube. You'll be able to watch it later on LinkedIn. And before we move forward, I want to say thank you to Kathy Perna at ISM New Jersey. She's been the one behind the scenes helping everything move forward, and she helps with booking guests, and she helps establish relationship with everybody at ISM New Jersey. And so she's the real hero here. And I also want to thank Sarah Scudder. She's the one that started this show back in 2020. She handed the baton to me about a year and a half ago, and I think that she did a great job setting this up and keeping it going. And all of the audience for this show is incredible as well. Thank you for coming along on this journey with us. But let's get this started the same way that I usually do. So I have a question for you, Phil. And just so everyone knows, we did not prep. He has no idea what we're going to talk about, which is very entertaining for me.
I'm hoping it's English football, by the way.
That's your other podcast.
Yeah.
We've got a few people saying hi. Hi, Susie.
And before we start, I wanted to give a shout out to Kathy Perna as well. Kathy's been and always and continues to be such an advocate for Art of Procurement and everything that I've done, for years and years and years and years. So it's always a pleasure to partner with Kathy, and Kathy does an incredible job on really just trying to elevate the community. So it's always a pleasure to support and help, wherever I can.
Agreed. I love Kathy. Maybe we'll bring her on in the very last minute or two. Okay, so I've been starting these episodes off with the same question. So if you watched another episode recently, you might be ready for this. It's a big one. Phil, how do you want to change the world?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. So how do I want to change the world? I think that it's probably a question that goes beyond procurement, and everything that we do in our procurement world. I just want everyone to be nice and kind to each other. That's what I wish. That would be a nice start, where we're all thinking about each other and looking after each other. And perhaps that's part of, the motivation behind when I started AOP, was just looking for ways that, I could help shine a light on what was going on in and around the profession that I love, and hopefully that people could learn from it and people could apply it to what they're doing and, be more successful in their careers. I was actually at an event yesterday and somebody came up to me and said, you know what, I started listening to the show 7-8 years ago, and some of the things that I heard on the show I take into meetings at my company, and people were looking at me like, where did you get all this from? And he was saying, that was kind of the start of a love affair with procurement for him, and he's still in the career, in the profession. Things like that are probably what, in my tiny little piece of the world. And, if there's any tiny little influence that I can possibly have, is, just help people achieve what they want to achieve in the career that they want to achieve it in. If that's procurement, then that's great. But no grand visions or anything like that.
And that's great. I think that is well reflected in what you've done with Art of Procurement. Mm-hmm. And apologies for not prepping you. I don't prep anybody on that question. Everybody comes in.
Just so you didn't. I'd also be asking ChatGPT how I could answer that.
Well, I think you did great. And now I'm gonna flip it right back. You should know the answer to this one. I know that you've answered this one for me. This is your starting question on your show. Did you choose procurement, or did procurement choose you?
So I definitely didn't choose procurement. It chose me. And that's one of the reasons why I asked the question, in the podcast and in the webinars, and when I'm doing all kinds of events. I came in, I did an internship in the UK at a company called Vauxhall, which is the UK equivalent of, the UK division of General Motors. And honestly, that internship was nothing more than sitting in a manufacturing plant and counting widgets in boxes, sending faxes to suppliers to tell them what their stock was, and probably too much eating of bacon sandwiches in the cafeteria, to kind of keep out of the way. So I started there, and an opportunity came up on the Ford to join the Ford grad scheme. And honestly, I didn't really think anything of it, but I thought, I can go to do 2 interviews in one day and claim my expenses twice. And that will help me as a student get a little bit more money.
Okay. You were destined for procurement. I'm sorry.
Already trying to, play the game. So I went down to Ford, and I was fortunate to get onto the Ford grad scheme. And when I did that, the grad scheme was operations, it was HR, it was marketing, it was fun things. And then there was this purchasing, which I knew nothing about. And for whatever reason, they placed me in purchasing. So I'm like, okay, I'll do this for 9 months. And then as soon as I can, I'll go into something else. And I went into purchasing. And despite the fact that I had a horrible boss who I hated with a passion, who just wasn't very supportive at all, as I'm new into this job. On the other hand, I thought, what? I get to spend other people's money and I get paid to travel. And so those two things, especially the getting paid to travel, because that's really my passion, is traveling. And I looked at other people who were on the rotation scheme, and they were just sat in corporate, in head office all day, every day. I thought, maybe there is something to this. And I never left, and that was as much as when you said decades with an S, was scary. I started in 2000. So, started in the automotive business. And honestly, there's a lot of good things and a lot of I'll say bad things with working in automotive purchasing, certainly back 25, 26 years ago. Probably what I didn't appreciate was how advanced it was. So some of the things that we did then, and because I was new into the profession, I had no idea that what we were doing was advanced stuff. That 26 years later is still, there's an awful lot of organizations that don't do the things that we did, related to category management, a lot of advanced sourcing and cost modeling and all those things that many organizations still don't do. But for then, I just thought, well, this is purchasing, as it was in automotive rather than procurement. And that's just, you always see this, is it purchasing or procurement? It really just depends on the industry and what they call it. But in automotive, it was just called purchasing. So that's where I started, and, went on a journey from there across different industries because, I didn't want to get stuck in one industry. And by stuck, what I mean is I wanted to have optionality. I'd see a lot of people who'd stayed in a particular industry for their entire career. And especially in one that's like automotive where, a lot of the practices are really best in class, and a lot of them are borderline. Are these ethical or not? The way that you use power dynamics against suppliers, and it's just it's a very mandate-driven culture. And whereas the vast majority of other industries are very relational. You have to earn the right to support a stakeholder versus if a stakeholder doesn't come to you, then they can get fired. Which is what automotive is like. And people who were in that environment for so long may struggle to make the transition out of a mandate-based environment, certainly in direct materials procurement. So, I went on my way to exploration to a variety of different industries and categories and roles and all that good stuff.
Well, I love to hear about your version of that answer and how you didn't necessarily choose procurement, but you've made it there. And I think that a lot of what you just said, the mandates and the way that maybe procurement has evolved over the years makes me wonder. And I'm so curious, like when did you start Art of Procurement as a podcast?
I started Art of Procurement in 2015.
Okay. So when you started asking people that same question in 2015, how do you feel that answer has changed over time?
Sadly, it hasn't. You would hope.
It hasn't?
No, you would hope that, with 11 years, which is crazy on its own. So, with 11 years that there is now a, cohort of people who are going through, that the procurement has built itself this reputation and it's got into universities and there's more people that are going through and, picking it as a career. I don't think the answer to that question has changed any since when I started asking it. So
okay,
I think
so how do most people answer?
What's that?
How do most people answer?
Yeah, most people will answer, I was a chemical engineer doing something over here. And then, I got involved in suppliers in some way. And then I was asked if I wanted to come to procurement, and I was like, okay, I'll give that a try. But the vast majority of people that end there stayed here, which is always really interesting. But there's not that many that churn through procurement. I think that some felt that they were being pushed to procurement as a place to, put them out of harm's way. And, they felt I'm going over there to, and it's not a place where my career will advance. And, I found that obviously that they can do that, but the perception of procurement that they had before they came in was, a negative one. Yeah, I mean, it's usually that there was just an opportunity that came up for somebody to go and work in purchasing or procurement, and they took it and then stayed in it.
Do you think that the perception has improved?
I'm not sure about that. The difficulty is that there's very few people or organizations out there that advocate for procurement with non-procurement leaders. So how is somebody in the C-suite going to find out about all the things that procurement can do if they don't already know it, if they've not experienced it? And there's the problem is that there's not necessarily, the way they find out is a consulting firm who comes and tries to sell them a procurement transformation once they finish the finance transformation. there's not really anybody else that's going out there and advocating and for what procurement can do amongst that, that level of execs. And so people don't, it's still in a lot of organizations, a hidden secret, I think, and we haven't yet really broken out. I think that we have more exposure within a lot of organizations now. COVID brought that, and all the way through COVID, I was like, you got to make this time. You got to show now that you're not just the SWAT team. Like, you've got your moment in the sun. Don't waste it on just, going up, beating suppliers up, taking care of risk, but doing nothing else, because then you'll be looked upon as somebody that's all you do, and you'll get put back in the box until that's needed again. And I think a lot of organizations were able to kind of grow out of that. But it's still really inconsistent of, how organizations think about procurement, I think.
I can tell you from my side of the business, being on like go-to-market teams at actual technology companies where we're selling many times to procurement type of personas and finance and IT, that there is a big shift in the way that we sell to a company, and we are so much more educated on procurement and what procurement cares about, and how to work with procurement on not only negotiation, but much sooner. Like right after that first demo, we're pulling in stakeholders and making sure everybody's requirements are being met. And I think that's the biggest difference that I've seen on my side, is procurement being looped in sooner. And I've even helped a couple people on the sales team at Umnitsa. I've helped prepare speaking points and slides specifically for procurement stakeholders, not just on why the IT team needs the solution, but why procurement also needs it to do their job better. And so, there's just like a different frame of mind now. And I know that from our side, there is a special like revere that we have for procurement, and the cost optimization and the strategy, I think, is seeping into other areas of the business. At least that's what I'm seeing at a high level. What are you seeing, or how do you feel about that?
So I think that procurement maturity is it's still, there isn't necessarily a consistency to procurement maturity. Like the entire, I would say at some level, the entire profession is maturing, across all organizations. But there are some organizations that go through a process where they'll become, I don't really like the term best in class, because it's kind of best in whose class. Each organization needs something different from a procurement organization. But you have teams who are, really performing well, and then they take their eye off the ball, and then before you know it, they're back to kind of the bottom, and they've got to start working their way up. And there's like this cycle that keeps repeating itself at many organizations, rather than just being compounding over time, which is what you really want to see, is you just continue to grow. So I think that, in many organizations, other stakeholders still don't necessarily want to let go of what they do, and they don't want to bring procurement in, because they still see, well, I'm not sure if, I'm my budget holder, I should have the responsibility to spend my own money the way that I want to spend it. I'm not sure if procurement understands what I really need or want, or, all the different excuses. But they probably see that, procurement does get results, and maybe they feel vulnerable to when procurement does get results, because, a light gets shined upon them. And we try, as procurement people, we try and use that in a nice way. You try and find advocates within the organization that you want to work with, and you get results with them, and then you want to shine a light on those results, so the fingers get pointed at those who have opted out of partnering with us, and you hope that an exec leadership will hold those people accountable. And maybe that's what's happening, is that more exec leaders are being held accountable when others in the organization are getting such good results when they partner with procurement.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I know that sometimes technology budget is now being held by procurement,
Mhm.
technology spend
Yeah.
and how it's spent and how it's managed is being held in procurement versus IT. I know that's not like that everywhere, but I'm seeing that more and more. And I think that is, it's complicated, I'm sure, for some IT leaders, but that does speak volumes about procurement
But I think
and what they're able to achieve.
But what's interesting is, we feel vulnerable, or like we talk everything, all the change that we see right now. And it's not just technology. It was before this, it was outsourcing. Like AI is kind of BPO 2.0, because all the fears were exactly the same 10, 15 years ago. They were just applied to, am I going to lose my job through outsourcing versus am I going to lose my job to technology? I think that what we lose sight of is that every other department feels the same as well. So we feel as though we've got to fight for that kind of permission, even though we don't necessarily need permission, but we feel like we have to fight for permission to be able to help folks and to be able to do what we do best. Well, everybody else across the rest of the organization that we think has everything buttoned up and, well, they get asked and they have all this power or whatever it is. Well, they have the same fears that we do. We just often have our blinkers on, and we're only thinking about how we feel. But I'm sure the IT folks have the same fears. The HR folks have the same fears. We all do. And it's like we're all competing against each other to try and, show who's best so we get the investment, what investment does exist in the business.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of realities, some of these technologies and wherever that money is being spent is beneficial for both, all. It's should be less competitive, but that's beside the point. Something you said earlier after that first question I asked you, when I turned your question on yourself, basically, and the answer hadn't changed very much over the years about, people choosing procurement or procurement choosing them. And it reminded me of conversations we had a few years ago back when we were figuring out your rebrand.
Yeah.
Shout out to that logo in the back.
Yes.
Designed by yours truly.
Yes. It was such a fun project and kind of professionalized us a little bit from me working in MS Paint the best I possibly could.
You did really well with all things considered, with the resources you had. But I remember us talking about how procurement itself needs a rebrand.
Yeah.
And a repositioning. And part of what you're doing is helping people kind of own their narrative, own procurement's narrative in their business. And a lot of what I hear you talk about and a lot of what I hear you practice and live out is becoming, like that sourcing hero, becoming owning the value that you deliver back to the business. And so, like, in the few years since we talked about that, like, I don't want to be cynical here, but I'm wondering, have you seen some progress in procurement? And I know we used to say they want to earn their seat at the table.
Yeah.
Right. That was like such a phrase in like 2020.
It's like I'll spend 5 minutes trying to think of an alternative language than seat at the table. I hate that so much.
I know. And I'm sorry I'm triggering you, but do you think that more people are feeling more empowered or stepping into their confidence in procurement than a few years ago when we were first talking about this?
I think that the underlying fears of, do people understand what I do? Do they recognize the value that I bring? Why don't they work with me? I think all those fears, all those concerns are still valid and probably as strong as they ever were. I think that because the world that we live in, that is, I think one of the things that's been good for procurement has been, kind of a little bit of a pivot to focus on risk and risk management and risk mitigation. And with all the unknowns that we've had, in the world for the last few years, really since COVID, that's placed more of a spotlight on what we can do. I think that those organizations and those individuals, because I will say, I think that procurement is still very much an individual rather than a team sport. And what I mean by that is, people are still the difference maker. You as an individual can have a huge impact on supporting your stakeholders in spite of the procurement organization that you work in. If you feel like you work in an organization that doesn't necessarily provide all the opportunities and the tools, and the platforms and the investments and everything that you want, you still have the power to have a really, really big difference. On the flip side, organizations can spend tons and tons of money on all the tools and the technologies and all that good stuff and still not generate the value that an individual who is very, very good at their job can do. And that's both empowering for individuals, but it's also a little bit of a shame for procurement that we've not been able to scale those best practices. I think that's one of the things we've struggled to do the most, is like, how do we scale what the best people do and how they build relationships and how they bring value? And I still don't necessarily see that we've done that. I think we do have the ear of the C-suite more than we ever did before. And so that's obviously helped us get more exposure, be involved in a lot more strategic conversations. It's not something that we've solved for particularly yet, but I'd say that it's improving. We're improving from that perspective.
Okay. All right. Just trying to take a positive take on this. All right. So what would you suggest then? Like, how can procurement organizations scale their best practices? Look, this doesn't have to be like a full framework. And honestly, I try to avoid these conversations in this show. But now that we're here, something real quick.
I mean, I think, you have to look at who are your biggest performers? What are they doing that's different from everybody else? And how do you codify that? Do you need to redesign processes around what they do? Are they, I would often not follow process and beg for forgiveness later with the philosophy that I'm never going to get fired if my stakeholders love working with me and I'm delivering results for them. But I could get fired if I knock the ball out of the park in terms of a savings number and everyone hates me for the way I delivered it. So that was always kind of what my philosophy as a buyer was. And so, it's like, what makes them successful and how do you take some steps backwards and try and figure out what are things that you can scale based on what they're doing? How can you build that into process? How do you re-engineer your processes? Is there certain technology that you can bring in that can help enable them to do that, or that to cover gaps? But that's where I'd start. We talked about brand. And I do think that brand is really, really important for procurement. I had a chat yesterday with Linda Chuan, and Linda is the Chief Value Officer at Box. And she was basically asked to rename her own job from Chief Procurement Officer and her organization, and chose Chief Value Officer.
That is brilliant. I'm sorry. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So she chose Chief Value Officer, and this is probably 2.5 years ago, and a team like value officers rather than procurement officers. And while, of course, you can do that and you can have lots of skeptical stakeholders that say, well, that's nice, but what's changed? So you have to follow through on that, or else, it's probably you're doing more harm than good by rebranding yourself in that way. But they did, and they followed through and just said, that just opened up so many more doors with stakeholders, because stakeholders didn't see us as a threat anymore. They saw us as somebody who's coming to help them. And just that alone and that change in perception really helped them become, and they've continued to kind of build on that, but become far more of an integrated part of the exec leadership team for the business. And so I do think that the way that you talk about yourselves, because back in the day, like, old-fashioned procurement was, well, I'm going to get results and results will do the speaking for themselves.
Right.
And that's all well and good, but you have to be able to tell a story. And that's what we're not very good at, is storytelling.
Because it's more than savings, right? That's
right.
I feel like in the last few years, that was one of the things that I remember hearing people talk about that and post about that procurement has to define their value beyond that savings number, because there is so much untapped value if you're not talking about it. There are so many value stories in what procurement does.
It's such a catch-22 because we definitely advocate for a balanced scorecard. Savings may be on there, risk may be on there, how you kind of understand and contribute to revenue is on there. There's all kinds of different ways that you can build a balanced scorecard that might differ based on the industry that you're in. But you kind of need to do that too, so that you're talking about more than just savings. But the difficulty that we've created for ourselves, and this is why it's on us to try and get ourselves out of this, is that oftentimes we make the pitch for investment in procurement based on savings. So if we go to the CFO and say, hey, I need you to invest $100,000 or $5 million or anything in between on X, and the payback is going to be measured by how much additional savings that I can generate from you, then we can't be surprised that that's all the business measures it on. We kind of take it's the easier way for us to make a case for investment because it can be tied to hard dollars. But then that's how the perception that everyone has of, well, this is how we measure them. So we have to think a little bit more about how do we make the case for investment in procurement? How do we bring in senior leaders at a senior governance level where they're helping to drive procurement strategy that goes again beyond just savings? Because otherwise it's a transactional relationship. A CFO and a CEO will give us X million dollars or X hundred thousands of dollars to do X, and we'll deliver Y back in cost savings. And that's what's expected of us.
Well, I'm sure you are having a lot of those conversations and helping and coaching and getting people on the right path, because I know when I have the right tools and the right technology in front of me, I know I do my job better. So I just hope that procurement taps into whatever it is that their stakeholders are asking them for, to reposition this as whatever ROI my stakeholders are planning to get through this purchase or this, mandate, whatever it is, that in turn, that's our ROI, and I am the ROI enabler.
Yeah.
I think that's the value story that you can always come back to.
The way I've always thought about this is that you manage a business within a business, and what that business is can be, if you're a CPO, the procurement organization is basically a procurement services business. If you're a sourcing lead or a category lead, that business is, your book of sourcing projects that you're responsible for. But whatever it is, think about that as a business, and then the question is, what do I have to deliver that keeps people coming back and wanting more? And so that's how you kind of frame, okay, how do I think about my value proposition? How do I think about how I'm supporting my stakeholders? How do I talk about what I do in terms of the outputs that they want to see? And then that's how you start getting into virtuous circles of, okay, so now, I'm being profitable or successful as a business because people keep coming back and they want more of what I do. And I never really saw that until I went onto the services side of the table. That was, the first probably 12, 13 years of my career was as a practitioner only. And then I went onto the services side of the table, and pretty quickly you see that it doesn't matter what savings you do. It's almost like, how do people feel about what you deliver versus what's the actual number you deliver, and what are you delivering to them that is important to them? And that's how clients stick around. So just apply that logic to your stakeholders and look at your stakeholders if they're clients or prospects.
That's great advice. And that's one of the things that I think that I have always been impressed with whenever I work with you is, yes, you've got really great field experience in procurement and supply chain, but you do think like a business owner, and you are thinking about your stakeholders as the people that are your customers.
Yeah.
And I think
it didn't start like that. It started with.
How did you learn that?
I think that it was probably only when I left procurement that I truly understood it. Because in the early days of procurement, I was one of the people that would sit around the table lamenting about the fact, well, why is stakeholder X not coming and using procurement? Why they don't understand what we're doing, or they're stupid because they went and negotiated this on their own. Well, they're not stupid because they can negotiate their own houses and their own cars, and it's not like they've never negotiated anything in their life before. But, we'd have such a feeling of it was probably insecurity of why do people not want to work with us, and we'd always blame them. And so, when you reflect on that, you think, well, what if I'm the problem? Or not me personally, but what if we're not providing the environment that it gives them what they want, that compels them to want to work with us? And so that's probably where I started to think about it. And then it wasn't until I was responsible for P&L on the services side when you start to really realize that you have to operate like a business. And so many times we think that because we exist and because there's a process and a policy, that's our license to operate, where it really isn't.
Yeah, because if that were the case, then why even have people in procurement? If there's just a policy and a process to follow, then people wouldn't need it. And we know that's not true.
And the other thing I'd say is, you always have to show up with information, insights, or interpretation that's different than they can get on their own, or they can do on their own. Because again, if you don't do that, then what's the point of you being in the room other than to run a process? And that's what we're all trying to get away from. So it may be that they're an expert in what they do far more than you are. And that was always the case for me because I was always a generalist. But with the nuggets of information, excuse me, or with the dots that you could connect that maybe they hadn't seen, that gave them some pause for thought, that helped them realize that, you can bring more than just run a process. And I'm just a big advocate of kind of trying to find what those nuggets are, where you can make a difference, or you can drive a different decision than the decision that would have been made if you weren't in the room.
I like how easy it is for you to talk about all of this because you've been doing it for 11 years on this side of the business. But I can't help but comment on how far you've come since I've known you, in the way that you speak about procurement. And I think that retrospect that you have has been developing and getting better and better. And I know that is what really helps people that listen to your show. But take us back to that time of when you decided to step away as a procurement practitioner, and you are thinking about doing this on your own and venturing into your own business, and now thinking, okay, I am actually a business owner. What made you, what was the tipping point for you of taking on that risk as someone who is quite risk averse?
Yeah. I think I fell out of love with it, with procurement, honestly, a little bit. I had a career goal of becoming a head of procurement by a certain age, and doing that, as I was always in a race to do something, and so I wanted to get to be a head of procurement as young as I could, and I did that, and I was, maybe 30 when that happened.
I'm sorry, that's impressive.
Yeah, it was probably because I was just right place, right time. So it was head of international procurement for a big financial services company. Maybe right place, right time. Maybe the fact that, my responsibilities were basically all non-US locations for this organization. And I was, the token Brit in the room. And so maybe that helped as well. But so I became head of international procurement. And it sucked. It sucked because personnel issues were difficult. You couldn't really move the needle in the things that I was trying to do. Limited budgets, all those things. And I'm like, do I really want to do this for the next 30 years of my life? And honestly, the answer was, I'm not sure if I do or not. And so I went to the other side of the table, as I said, and went on the outsourcing and procurement services side of the table. And I'd been involved with this company. I was managing them a job or two prior. And so I knew them. It was an opportunity for me to go and relocate. And I really enjoyed the job that I did in leading client accounts in basically procurement outsourcing, but category management and sourcing outsourcing. And then that business got taken over by Accenture. And I wasn't really enjoying being at Accenture too. It's just a big change from being in a relatively small business to a huge business. And, they need to be a lot more structured and mechanical probably when they're managing so many people and so many clients. And I didn't necessarily fit into that. And so I'd always been thinking I wanted to go and had this entrepreneurial itch. My business school teacher, at 16, 17 years old, was always telling me, like, I'm the one in the class that's going to run my own business. But I was always too risk averse, as you mentioned, to think about it. So I went off and did the traditional career. And, that thought just was always nagging at me. And you're thinking, you're always waiting for the right time. So I'm thinking, I'm going to do this one day, but what's the right time? And you think that, well, the right time is when I've got some money saved up, or it's when this, or when that. And I realized that time's never going to come. Here I am now with a Southern California mortgage, a 18-month-old, another one on the way. And things are not going to get, any less. I'm not going to have any less responsibility from here on in. So screw it. Why not just go and try this now? And unfortunately, people advocate all the time, well, if you're going to go and start your side hustle, make sure it's on the side, you got to keep your revenue and all those things. But because it's in the same space, I couldn't do that because of conflicts of interest. So I had to just do a clean break.
You had to go all in.
Yeah. So I went all in. I went all in with the idea that I'm going to do build a productized service business that helps folks with their procurement operating model design and hybrid in-source, outsource kind of organizations. How do you bring the best of outsourcing and internal folks together? And that was the idea. And I started the podcast probably 2 months in, thinking, because I'd listened to a lot of podcasts to help me make the decision to go and jump off this cliff. And I looked around and there really wasn't anything. There was John Hansen had a podcast. Kelly Barner had a podcast, and that was it. And so I thought, you know what, maybe there's an opportunity here for a podcast in procurement. And if no one ever tunes in, it's going to be good for me because I can use it as a way to speak to people who ordinarily wouldn't speak to me. And think, well, who's this bloke that's trying to talk to me? Because, I'm the introvert. I don't know how to sell. All the stories you tell yourself. Hate being on stage. Maybe this is a good opportunity for me to get to know people. And that's really how it started. And from there, it just became much bigger than I ever thought it would do, which was a blessing and a curse. Because then I didn't know, am I a podcast business or media business? I'd have inbound inquiries about learning and development because people would say, I really like the way that you teach my teams. And I never wanted to do a learning and development business, but I wanted to take the cash because I needed it to keep surviving. And so I kind of drifted away from being a consulting business to not really knowing what I was. And that was probably for 5 years. And that was, any sane person would have walked away, a lot earlier. But I thought, there's something here. I just don't know how to connect the dots. I think anyone on the outside looking in would tell me how successful it is. But my only measure of success was I'm getting paid less than when I ate bacon sandwiches all day, and as an intern, and having to sell my house and move cross country and basically putting every penny I had into this without knowing what the end goal was. That was kind of my real, the reality behind the brand and the trust and all those things we were building. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to figure this out in time, but I also knew that I didn't really have a choice but to try and figure it out in time.
I remember having calls with you during, some of that early period. Do you remember the flywheel slide that you showed me?
Yeah,
of here's how we're gonna spark the growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that you stuck it out, and you kept with the building of community through your podcast and through events that you do with procurement technology vendors, because ultimately what they're after is creating that community with their prospective customers, their customers and their users. And but sometimes you just don't know the vehicle to get there, and what it is that will push, put the fuel in the engine for growth. But I think the timing of 2020 and the need, I remember procurement community, the concept of community, and like that collective idea sharing, excuse me, the collective idea sharing and just the open communication, more open communication just exploded. And that need to feel like you're a part of community, you tapped into that. And I think several people wanted to replicate that. And the thing is that you had been doing it, and you had a really great jumping off point. And so your flywheel
already.
Yeah, your flywheel was already in position. And so I know you went through like some rough moments where you're like, how do we do this, and how do we keep going and growing? And I remember you telling me that it was hard for you to sell yourself and sell the value of art of procurement. And I remember telling you from the other side, as somebody who was an art of procurement customer, how much value you bring. And so that's why I said earlier that you've really come a long way in this retrospective.
I think I still have the imposter syndrome. I also think that because how hard, those first few years were, there's so much still PTSD that comes along with that journey, that, you talk to other people, even on our team, about, who were able to take a much more objective view of what we are, what we do, the value proposition, the future prospects and all those things. I still can't help myself from looking over my shoulder, but I also think that drives me. And I think it's probably a positive, in another regard, because it just helps continue. Everything I've done since day one has just been an endless stream of experiments, and and that continues to be the case. I think that sometimes probably the team would say that they wish that we'd just stand still for a minute. And there may be something in that.
I've wondered about that. Yeah.
But I am always just looking at how can we evolve and grow, because as the world changes all around us, and probably because of that little bit of, in my head thinking, well, what if it all goes to zero next year? I don't want that to have happened and I was asleep at the wheel. So I still have that internal dialogue, with myself as we continue to build. But I do just believe in a series of experiments, and you kind of see what works and what doesn't. When it comes to COVID, in 2019, we were trying to pitch everybody on this idea of a community that was virtual. And it was run by, having lots of Zoom meetings and, bringing people together in virtual roundtables and all that kind of stuff. And, basically the response that we would get from all these people when we're trying to pitch that was, what's Zoom? That's not going to fly. And so the pandemic was good for us in that regard, that everybody then had to go digital. And we already had a bit of a head start on trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah. And how many years at that point had you been doing your podcast?
So that would have been 5 years when COVID hit.
That's right. Yeah. And so you'd already been in people's headsets every day, so it was such a natural inflection point for the business.
Yeah. And since then we've probably 8 to 10x'd, in size since the COVID year. So that was, it created a good jumping off point, but it still wasn't easy by any stretch of the imagination. But when we were able to take that momentum and then continue to build and experiment and and add different things and continue to build and grow the business from them. But that was really the moment when it turned, when things changed and we started to see, there's a business here that we can grow versus how the heck am I going to keep the lights on, at the end of next month.
And you've done so much in the last year. I just briefly want to touch on.
Yeah.
I know it's not an experiment. I'm sure you're at the point where you are, you're a real strategist. But tell me about the Procure-Tech 100 acquisition.
So I think that there's probably a few different angles to it. One is that I think that a lot of what we've done, probably because of my background, has been more on the services side rather than technology of procurement. A lot of the content, a lot of where our expertise is, and we really needed to add some knowledge, some intelligence, some expertise around Procure-Tech, the procurement technology side. And so it was a question of, is it something that we build or is it something that we buy? And it was very opportunistic for us to go and buy the Procure-Tech 100 to kind of bring that into what we do. But the bigger picture there is, there's a couple of things. One is when you just look at procurement technology, and obviously procurement technology and digitization is exploding. But how do you create community around procurement technology? And you have this such a landscape where there are 700-800 providers, and CPOs are kind of confused. Like, where do I go? Where do I even start with this? The people that we talk to whose job is to manage digitization are still overwhelmed by all the different choices. So we thought that this brings us a way for us to be able to kind of demystify a little bit of what the world looks like from a technology perspective, but also build community around it. So we can get all these like-minded people coming together to talk about, well, this is what I do, this is what I've tried, these providers I've looked at, this is what's worked, this is what's not worked. I'll share my tech stack with you and I'll tell you kind of how we put it together. There's a lot of education of, that's peer-driven that happens with that. And that was a big piece of it because we wanted to really look at how do we build some Procure-Tech intelligence offerings that bring together kind of peer-driven perspectives and experiences, as opposed to probably more the analyst side, which is, this is what I think works, versus practitioners saying this is what I know works. And that's how I looked at it a little bit. But bigger picture, I looked at what we do as, we have digital media. We've had digital media for a long time, which is the podcast, the webinars, the white papers, all that good stuff. We started our events business, so the in-person events business last year, which is another, the Procure-Tech was opportunistic. It was really, really hard to start an events business and acquire Procure-Tech and start the Procure-Tech 100 and start getting involved in Procure-Tech intelligence at the same time. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have done those so close to each other, but sometimes you just got to take what the opportunities are, when they arrive. So you have the digital media, you have the event space, you have the Procure-Tech 100, and we have a digitization enablement practice, which is consulting, which helps folks kind of go on this digitization journey. Collectively, you're bringing together something that doesn't really exist anywhere else. So each one of those pillars, you have other folks that we may compete with, but when you look at it across the entire continuum, it's really something that we're able to put together and package together and bring insights from one to another and share insights with different people in a way that others who just have one of those silos, if you will, might not be able to do on their own. So that's how we looked at it all, kind of mapping together, but all around this idea of real world intelligence. So that's always been core to everything that we do and we talk about, is like bringing real practitioner experiences and showcasing real practitioner experiences. And that's what I mean by real world intelligence. I think that we want to be the pragmatists in the room, where we can have our vision of what might happen in the next 5 years. But as I know, as being a practitioner, things aren't that easy. You have 500 competing priorities where you can only focus on, what am I going to do with AI for 2 minutes every Friday afternoon, if you're lucky. And that's the reality, versus a lot of the hype that's out there. And so that's our goal, is how do we make all this real? How do we make it pragmatic? How do we give people like real steps? And it's based on, again, real world experiences that everyone in the community has to share with each other. And that's really what we're trying to bring together against throughout all those different verticals.
It's an amazing value prop. I love it. And I think it speaks to the 8 to 10x growth.
Yeah. And it's, would you choose to sometimes it feels like you're pushing 4 boulders uphill at the same time, with these different kind of verticals. Should we just focus on one? Because that's what I learned from the first part of the business
most
niche.
Business owners land and expand. Yes.
Yeah. I learned about, from mistakes that I made earlier in the business was don't try and be too much to all people. I think this time around, we're being a lot more structured, in how we think about it. We obviously have people who are experts, in their field, as part of the leadership team who are able to build these different elements as well. So it's not all, based on Kelly and I's bandwidth, which is, one of the struggles earlier in the business.
So what have you learned about yourself at all of this? Either, you can make that reflection on the entire 11 years or maybe the last few years, whatever feels best. But I'm curious, because you've told me what you've learned about the industry and the people. What about you?
Trust yourself. Probably, be yourself. You talk yourself out of, I think business and life is so confidence driven. When I was a practitioner, I was probably too overconfident, and because I guess I was lucky, I was successful in what I did, and I carried that in confidence, and in any meetings, in any negotiations, all those things. When you go and do it for yourself, all of a sudden your confidence goes to the floor, and you get all these knockbacks, and you think that you're useless and you don't know what you're doing, and should you be doing this, and I need to learn new skills, and yes, you do need to learn new skills, and you have to be somebody else. You always have to put on a persona to be somebody else, and that's probably what I learned about myself more is have confidence in yourself, and don't try and be somebody that you're not.
That's perfect.
And so that's where I was like, take it or leave it.
And it is so funny for me to hear you say that you were overconfident as a procurement practitioner, because I would never peg you as somebody with an ego.
No, well, I was about to say, I've got really don't have much of an ego. I'm always attributing things to good fortune or luck or, rather than design. But I was good at procurement, and I kind of knew it, in those early days. And, I portrayed that, and that probably helped me, in situations that I was in from a negotiation perspective. But you go from that to the opposite when you go and or I did when I went to start my own business.
Well, what can we expect out of Art of Procurement this year?
So feels like we're already 9 months into the year and not in February. So we are continuing to a couple of things actually. We're actually undergoing a very bringing in some new newsletters, which actually will start to go live next week. So, as we mature and grow up and think about what we are as a business, we're thinking about how we can better serve the community. So we're doing that. We have our events, and we have our next event in San Francisco in May, and then another one in New York in November. We'll have our first one for direct materials manufacturing in Detroit in September as well.
What a great place to do that.
Yeah, it's perfect. Well, that's where I spent 7 or 8 years of my life in Detroit, and direct materials procurement is underserved, when it comes to events and sharing best practice and all that good stuff. New, hopefully bigger and better ProcureTech 100 that we're working on, that will come out towards the end of the year. And I'm just working furiously in Claude all day, every day. I am just like a kid in a candy store, working with AI, and thinking about how we can use that both from a to uncover more insights across, the 1,000+ podcasts and webinars and things we've had over the last 11 years, and that source of just such tremendous kind of value that's buried within all of that. But also, how can we use that to bring new ways for the procurement community to engage with us as well? So that's where I spend, an inordinate amount of time right now. But I'm so excited by the possibilities of AI.
I am too, and hoping that maybe we can figure out some more ethical practices with AI as well, because of the value needs to balance out how it affects people and the environment and all of that. That's another show, another day, another conversation. But I want to wrap this up by, again, thanking you, Phil, for being like my shepherd in this industry and for coming on for the final episode. Like, first of all, I'm thankful that you even had time to fit into your schedule. I know that it's been real busy for you lately, so thank you.
No, it's my pleasure to do this. So, and thank you for the opportunity to come on and chat. I always enjoy chatting, and you've probably been too generous in terms of, the support, because you've definitely been there for me as well over the years, and I appreciate your friendship.
Likewise. And, this is just for anybody listening. Thank you for listening and tuning in. If you tuned into any other episodes, if you go back and listen, there's so much goodness in these episodes. The guests have been incredible. I'm going to do another post to just call out just the incredible people that we've brought through on this show. Thank you all for coming alongside and being on the other end, watching these shows. It's been so much fun. And Kathy Perna, again, thank you so much. This is not the end of me and in and around this community of wonderful people in sourcing, supply chain, procurement. I'll be around. I'm just not going to have the voice of supply chain at the top of my screen, unfortunately. But I'm still here. Please reach out. I love to speak with all of you. And I wish you all the very best, and keep writing your value stories, as Phil has with Art of Procurement. Keep writing your value stories through procurement, and the successful will follow. I think Phil's a really great example of that. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.